I slipped out of the living room before anyone noticed my hands were shaking. My father was still talking, his voice low and deliberate, the way it always got when he'd already made up his mind and just wanted my brother to confirm it. I'd only caught the tail end of it, but those words were enough. Ellie, she gets the house in Duluth. That's it. The rest goes to you. All of it. I stood in the hallway with my back against the wall, staring at the water stain on the ceiling I'd looked at my whole childhood. My mother must have been sitting right there at the kitchen table when he said it. She didn't say a word. Not one word. I already knew she wouldn't. My name is Eleanor Marsh. Everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 31 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed that my family was the kind that argued at Thanksgiving and then got over it. Normal friction. Normal tension. I thought the favoritism was just something I'd imagined, something I'd blown out of proportion because I was the younger one, the quieter one, the one who left for college and didn't come back. I was wrong about all of it. My father built Marsh Mechanical from nothing. He started it out of a garage in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin when he was 26 years old, with a used pipe threader and a truck he bought on credit. By the time I was in middle school, it was the largest commercial HVAC contractor in the Tri-County area. By the time I graduated from UW-Madison with an accounting degree, it was pulling in just over $4 million a year in revenue. My brother Tyler had worked there since he was 17. He knew the systems, knew the crews, knew the clients. He was good at the job. I don't take that away from him. But I had spent 6 years working for a mid-sized CPA firm in Milwaukee, learning every inch of how a business like my father's should be structured. Its books, its tax exposure, its liability, its succession. I came back to Fond du Lac 2 years ago when my father's health started to slip. Not for the business, for him. I thought that's what families did. My father had a condition called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It's a lung disease that scars the tissue slowly, and there's no reversing it. When I moved back into my childhood home to help with his care, he was still mobile, still sharp. He could walk to the mailbox and argue with my mother about the thermostat and watch the Packers on Sunday afternoon. By last winter, he needed oxygen overnight. Tyler lived 20 minutes away with his wife and their 2 kids. He came over on weekends mostly. My mother handled the daytime. I handled the paperwork, the insurance claims, the medical billing disputes, the pharmacy coordination, the conversations with the pulmonologist's office about what the next 6 months were likely to look like. I did not resent any of it. I want to be clear about that. I was glad to be there. My father and I had always understood each other in a quiet way. He wasn't a man who said much, but he'd come find me in whatever room I was reading in and just sit down nearby, and that meant something. It meant a lot. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that decisions were being made in that house while I was driving to the pharmacy, while I was on hold with Medicare, while I was doing everything I thought a daughter was supposed to do. I found out in pieces. The first piece was a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I had come back from picking up a prescription and let myself in through the back door the way I always did. My father's study was off the hallway near the kitchen. The door was half open. Tyler's voice came through it first. "She's not listed on anything," he said. "Not the operating agreement, not the bank signature card, nothing." "That's right," my father said. He sounded tired. He always sounded tired by then. "And you're sure about the house in Duluth? She gets that and the savings account in her name." "That's it. I've thought about this, Tyler. She has her career. She's going to be fine." I stood in the hallway with a frozen lasagna in one hand and my keys in the other. The fluorescent light above the stove was buzzing. I remember that detail very specifically, the buzz of that light. My mother's voice came next, softer than either of theirs. "She'll understand eventually." I set the lasagna on the counter. I walked back out the door I'd just come in through. I sat in my car in the driveway for 19 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Then I went back inside and put the lasagna in the oven and didn't say anything to anyone. The Duluth house was a real thing. My paternal grandmother had left it to my father years ago, and he'd let it sit, rented it out for a while, then stopped bothering. It was a small craftsman on a dead-end street near the lake. Nice enough. Probably worth $230,000 on a good day. Marsh Mechanical, conservatively, was worth somewhere between 3 and 4 million. I knew the books. I'd helped my father reorganize the accounting structure when I first moved home. I had seen every number. I knew what the equipment was worth, what the contracts were worth, what the client relationships were worth. And I knew that my name was not on any of it. I did not panic. This is the thing about having a financial background. It doesn't make you cold, but it does make you slow down before you react. I went to my room that night and I sat at my desk and I made a list of what I knew for certain and what I still needed to find out. What I knew, my father intended to leave the business entirely to Tyler. What I didn't know, whether there was a signed will, when it had been executed, who the attorney was, and whether any of this could be contested. What I did next surprised even me. I called my father's accountant. His name is Ray Kolchik, and he'd been doing my father's personal and business taxes for 15 years. He wasn't a close family friend exactly, but he was the kind of person my father trusted in the specific way that Midwestern men trust competent professionals. Quietly, completely, without ever saying so out loud. Ray and I had met a handful of times over the past 2 years when I helped organize my father's financial records. I'd impressed him, I think, mostly by knowing what questions to ask. I told Ray I needed to talk. I told him it was important, and that I wasn't looking to stir up conflict. I just needed to understand what I was looking at. He agreed to meet me at his office on a Wednesday morning when I said I had errands to run. He confirmed what I feared and then added something I hadn't considered. The will had been updated 14 months ago. My father had done it with an attorney named Greg Halverson, a man my brother had recommended. Not a family attorney, Tyler's personal attorney. Ray didn't say anything judgmental about that. He just laid out what he knew. But I saw something shift behind his eyes when he said it, and I filed that away. Is there anything in how the business is structured, I asked, that might be relevant to an estate challenge? Ray looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, I think you might want to talk to an estate attorney. Soon. And not someone your brother knows. I found Catherine Doss through a referral from a law school contact of a former colleague. She was a partner at a firm in Madison, not local, which felt right. I drove down on a Thursday, told my mother I had an old friend visiting, and spent 2 hours in Catherine's office going through everything I knew. Catherine was methodical and unsentimental. I liked that. She asked me about the operating agreement for Marsh Mechanical. I told her what I knew, that it was a single-member LLC with my father as the sole owner, and that Tyler was listed as operations manager, but not as an equity holder. Has anything changed recently? She asked. New filings, amendments to the operating agreement? Any transfers of interest? I don't know, I said. I haven't seen any. Then we find out, she said. She explained that in Wisconsin, a will could be contested on grounds of undue influence, particularly if the testator was in declining health and the will had been modified with the assistance of a beneficiary's personal attorney. She wasn't making promises. She was describing a road. You'd need evidence of the influence, she said. Not suspicion. Evidence. I drove back to Fond du Lac in the dark and I thought about that word the whole way home. Evidence. I want to pause here and tell you something that I have thought about many times since. I loved my father. I still love him, even now. I don't think he was a bad man. I think he was a tired man who wanted peace in his family and believed that Tyler, being the one who'd stayed, being the one who'd built something alongside him, deserved what he built. I think my mother agreed with that without ever saying so directly. I think Tyler. I don't know. I think Tyler told himself it was fair. I think people are very good at believing what benefits them. But I also think about the years I gave. I think about the Saturdays I drove my father to pulmonology appointments while Tyler was at his kids' soccer games. I think about the insurance appeals I filed, the 18-minute hold times, the binders I organized so that whoever needed to step in after my father was gone would know exactly where everything was. I didn't do any of that for money. I want to be honest about that. But there is a difference between not doing something for money and being told outright that you deserve nothing. I wasn't going to let that stand. The following 3 months were the strangest of my life. I was living in that house, caring for my father, having breakfast with my mother every morning, watching my brother come and go on weekends, and quietly, carefully, building a case. Catherine had connected me with a forensic accountant named Dr. Dory. Patricia Webb, no connection to my family, no connection to Ray, who agreed to review whatever documentation I could legally obtain. I was careful about what I accessed. I did not take anything that wasn't already in my name or that I hadn't already been given permission to work with during the reorganization process 2 years prior. But I had copies of a lot. Because I'd made them. Because I was thorough. Because that's who I am. Dr. Webb found 3 things. First, 14 months ago. The same month the will was updated, there had been an amendment to the LLC's operating agreement granting Tyler a 20% equity interest in Marsh Mechanical. This had never been mentioned to me. Second, in the 18 months prior to that, the company had made payments to a vendor called RTM Solutions LLC, totaling just under $200,000. RTM Solutions did not appear in any contractor database. Its registered agent address was a UPS store in Appleton, Wisconsin. Third, Tyler's home address was listed as the mailing address for RTM Solutions LLC on its initial articles of organization. I read Dr. Webb's summary report in my car in the parking lot of a Quick Trip on a Tuesday afternoon. I read it twice. Then I called Catherine. "How soon can you file?" I said. My father died on a Thursday in March. I was with him. My mother was on the other side of the bed. Tyler arrived about 40 minutes later after it was over. I don't hold that against him. These things don't always wait for us to be ready. The funeral was in Fond du Lac at the church my father had attended since he was a child. There were more people than I expected. Old clients, old crew members, men in their 60s with rough hands who had worked for him in the early years and wanted to pay their respects. I stood beside my mother and shook hands and said thank you and did not cry in front of anyone. I cried later, alone, in the room I'd grown up in. I gave myself 2 weeks. Catherine filed in April. The claims were twofold. First, a challenge to the will on the basis of undue influence, specifically that the 2023 amendment had been procured through Tyler's involvement in selecting and instructing the drafting attorney at a time when my father's cognitive function was compromised by his illness and its treatment. Second, a separate civil claim related to the RTM Solutions payments, alleging that Tyler had used his position as operations manager to route company funds to an entity he controlled, constituting a breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. Tyler called me the day after the filing. I didn't answer. He texted me, "What are you doing, Ellie? This is insane. You're going to tear the family apart over money." I read that message several times. I thought about the word money. I thought about how easy it was for the person who had everything to call the person who had nothing greedy for asking for something. I didn't respond. My mother called me 2 days later and cried on the phone. She said I was destroying my father's legacy. She said he had made his wishes known and I was going against them. She said things that I have mostly forgiven but have not forgotten. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, "Mom, I love you. I'll talk to you when this is over." Then I hung up. The deposition process lasted 6 weeks. I sat across a conference room table from Tyler and his attorney on a Tuesday in June, and I answered every question they asked me plainly and directly and without emotion. Tyler couldn't look at me. His attorney was good. She tried several angles to suggest that I had accessed business records improperly, that my relationship with Ray had been manipulative, that the forensic review had relied on stolen documentation. Catherine dismantled each one. The RTM Solutions payments were not easy to explain away. Tyler's attorney argued they were legitimate consulting fees for work performed on a software transition project. But Dr. Webb had documented that the software transition project referenced in the company's internal records had been completed by a different vendor 18 months before RTM Solutions received its first payment. Tyler's attorney asked for a continuance. Catherine said she would oppose it. I want to tell you about a moment that I think about still. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late July, about 3 weeks before the mediation was scheduled. I had driven back to Fond du Lac to collect the last of my things from my father's house. My mother was at her sister's place in Green Bay. The house was empty. I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen with its buzzing fluorescent light that still hadn't been replaced. I stood in my father's study where I'd heard that conversation through a half-open door. I stood in the garage where he kept tools so organized you could see the outline of each one on the pegboard. I am not a person who believes things happen for a reason. But I stood in that garage for a long time, looking at the pegboard. And I thought, he built something real. He built something from nothing with his own hands. It deserved to be treated honestly. I locked the door behind me and drove back to Milwaukee. The mediation happened on a Friday in August in a neutral office in Madison. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Fenn, who had reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and the particular patience of someone who has sat through a very large number of human disputes. He did not rush anything. Tyler's side opened with an offer. They would honor the original terms of the updated will, the Duluth house and the savings account, and add a cash payment of $75,000 in exchange for dropping both claims. I looked at Catherine. She looked at me. No, I said. We came back with a formal demand based on Dr. Webb's valuation. I was asking for 25% of the business, retroactive distribution for the period during which Tyler had received equity and I had not, and full disgorgement of the RTM Solutions payments, approximately $200,000. Tyler's attorney said my demands were aggressive. Catherine said, we can go to trial. We're comfortable going to trial. We broke for lunch. When we came back, Tyler's side asked for an hour in a separate room with Harold Fenn. The hour became 90 minutes. When Harold came back in, he set a yellow legal pad on the table and said, I think we're closer than we look. The final settlement took another 3 weeks to negotiate and document, but the structure was agreed to that afternoon. Tyler retained operational control of Marsh Mechanical. We both knew that was right. He knew the business, and I was building a life in Milwaukee and had no desire to run an HVAC company. But I received a buyout for a 22% equity stake, valued at just over $800,000, paid over 4 years. The RTM Solutions payments were treated as a loan to Tyler from the company, to be repaid with interest into an account we both had visibility on. And the Duluth house, which had been in the will all along, was mine outright. Tyler signed. His attorney looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Catherine walked me to my car afterward and shook my hand. You were very steady, she said. In my experience, that matters more than anything else. I drove home on the interstate with the windows down even though it was starting to get cold. I stopped at a Culver's in Fort Atkinson and ate a fish sandwich in the parking lot and watched the cars go by. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too. I felt something more like relief, and underneath it, something that was still sad and probably would be for a long time. My mother and I are in contact again. It took until November. She called me on a Sunday and didn't apologize exactly, but she talked about my father, stories I hadn't heard, things he'd said about me when I wasn't in the room. She said he'd told her once, maybe a year before he died, that he thought I was the one who'd gotten his stubbornness, and that he meant it as the best compliment he knew how to give. I believed her. Tyler and I have not spoken. I don't know if we will. There is a version of a future where we find a way to be in the same room at holidays and be civil, and I leave room for that version. But I don't pursue it. Some things need more time than I currently have. What I know is this. I came back to that town because I loved my father. I stayed because I thought family meant showing up. I found out that some people in your family are showing up too, just for different things than you are. The house in Duluth is mine. I drove up to see it last September, first time in years. It's a good house. Small rooms with good light, a front porch that looks at the street through old maple trees. My grandmother had kept a garden in the back that had gone wild, but the bones of it were still there. The stone border, the raised beds, the trellis with an old rose that had climbed all the way to the fence. I'm going to fix it up. Not because I need it, not because I have something to prove, because it's mine and it's good, and some things deserve to be taken care of properly. I stood on that porch in September with a cup of gas station coffee and looked at the maples dropping their leaves, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That's the whole story. That's all of it. And if you're sitting somewhere right now wondering whether it's worth it, whether standing up for yourself against the people who were supposed to love you is worth everything it costs, I'll tell you what I know. It doesn't stop hurting. but it stops being something that's happening to you. And that changes everything. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not in the legal sense, Catherine handled that, but in the personal sense. The kind of difference that determines whether you survive something like this or get buried by it. It wasn't anger. I had anger, plenty of it, but anger alone would have made me sloppy. I would have confronted Tyler at Sunday dinner. I would have said something to my mother that couldn't be unsaid. I would have burned through the only leverage I had, the element of being underestimated, before I built anything real to stand on. What actually saved me was the habit of slowing down before I reacted. I learned that from years of sitting across from clients whose books didn't balance, whose numbers told a story different from the one they were telling me. You don't fix a problem by getting loud about it. You fix it by understanding exactly what you're looking at. When I heard my father's voice through that half-open door, I set down the lasagna and I walked outside and I sat in my car and I gave myself 19 minutes to feel whatever I needed to feel. Then I went back in and made dinner and didn't say a word. That restraint, that choice to act rather than react, was the first decision that mattered. The second was being honest with myself about what I was actually fighting for. It wasn't the money, not exactly. It was the principle underneath the money. The idea that the years I gave, the appointments, the insurance calls, the binders full of documentation no one else wanted to deal with, counted for something. That showing up for someone shouldn't make you invisible to them. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being erased by the people who were supposed to see you most clearly. And I think if you felt it, you know exactly what I mean. Tyler told himself a story in which he deserved everything because he had stayed. My mother told herself a story in which peace meant silence. My father, I think, told himself a story in which dividing things unequally was the same as dividing them practically. None of those stories were evil. They were just convenient. And convenient stories have a way of costing someone else something real. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that integrity isn't just about what you do when someone's watching. It's about what you do with what you know. I had information that could have been used carelessly, vindictively, in ways designed to wound rather than to correct. I chose not to use it that way. Not because I'm particularly noble, but because I understood that the goal was a fair outcome, not punishment. There's a difference, and that difference matters more than most people realize when they're standing in the middle of something like this. The house in Duluth is mine now. The settlement is real, and I am standing in a life I chose and fought for with my own hands. That's what integrity actually looks like. Not the absence of conflict, but the refusal to win by becoming something you'd be ashamed of later.